An interesting interview with the former Denver Snuffer fan. Next on Polygamy, What Love Is This? We're continuing with our series asking the question, why do people insist on following mere men when they should be following only Jesus? Last time we ended in the middle of a discussion about Denver Snuffer, who is a more recent example of people gathering around others, men who has messages that their itching ears want to hear, as the Bible puts it. We have a guest this time who is an ex-member of the Denver Snuffer following, but first we want to finish up with what we were discussing last time in Denver Snuffer's teaching about Joseph Smith. He remains a believer in Joseph Smith as a true prophet. In fact, he said, and I quote, "Joseph offered humility, light, and truth. Hiram was a moral man of unquestioned integrity." The LDS Church Historian's Office shamefully throws mud at both these men to uphold the wickedness of those who got control after their murders, end quote. Now, in saying this, Snuffer is rewriting actual history about Joseph Smith, repeating what the LDS Church itself has been doing these many years by sanitizing the accounts of Joseph Smith's activities. It never ends, and the process of doing this never ends, actually, and sadly many people are deceived in following them into those errors. Now, Snuffer claims that Smith offered humility, light, and truth, and that he and Hiram were virtuous men, but unless he has redefined what virtuous means, that cannot be true. Both of them lived and taught in opposition to what the Bible teaches, and there's plenty of evidence in journals and diaries and personal testimony, even court cases and documents that Brigham Young could never have had the opportunity to corrupt, as he claims. How could he possibly have located them all anyway, or even know that some of them existed? Now, Hiram Smith had 4 wives and 8 children, obviously following his brother Joseph into polygamy. And only a false god would command polygamy. So Hiram wasn't a moral man either with integrity. He was also involved with the magic and the money digging that his brother Joseph was engaged in. And Hiram became a Freemason in 1827, where questionable practices and behaviors took place. Hiram also tried to get Emma to agree to Joseph's polygamy. A godly man would never involve himself in those kinds of activities. Snuffer said that Joseph Smith offered humility, light, and truth. We have a statement illustrating Joseph's humility or lack of it, and I quote, he said, "God made Aaron to be the mouthpiece for the children of Israel, and he will make me, be God to you in his stead, and the elders to be a mouth for me, and if you don't like it, you must lump it." Now, if this illustrates humility, we oppose their definition. Another quote by Smith that illustrates his lack of humility is this. He said, "I have more to boast of than any other man any man had. I am the only man that has ever been able to keep a whole church together since the days of Adam. A large majority of the whole have stood by me. Neither Paul, John, Peter, nor Jesus ever did it. I boast that no man ever did such a work as I. The followers of Jesus ran away from him, but the Latter-day Saints never ran away from me yet." Now, of course, that's not true. A lot of people left the early Mormon Smith movement, but Snuffer and his followers say that the LDS Church itself has changed the truth about Joseph Smith. But that's what he said. And his Snuffer claims that Brigham Young is the culprit who changed the history. But Brigham Young always backed up Joseph Smith. He glorified him. In fact, Brigham taught that no one gets into heaven without Joseph Smith's okay. And so to complete our series, why should people follow men when they should only be following Jesus, we have a guest, a woman who became a follower of Denver Snuffer, but discovered that something was very wrong. So here to share her story, I would like to introduce and thank her for coming is Jolene Phelps.
Hi, thank you for having me on your show,
Thank
Doris.
You got such a lovely story to tell that, it just fits right into our topic that we've been doing now for 2 or 3 times. And we're going to take a couple of shows to talk about your story of being involved both with the LDS Church and with Denver Snuffer.
Yeah, I'll be happy to share it.
And we're grateful. If we don't share our stories, who's going to really know the experiences that come up as we show the errors of some of these people and their teachings. So your journey actually included, in a way, a quest for closeness with Jesus, a quest to know God.
Oh, yes.
And you tried different things, and you finally landed with the true Jesus, which we'll talk about that as we wrap this up. But were you, before you followed Denver Snuffer, were you a member of the LDS Church?
Yes, I was all my life. A very strong member. I mean, I would say my mom was a Cuban refugee. She came when she was about 18 with her mother and sisters, and they lived in New Jersey. And that's at that time, it was the 60s, and it was the, hippie love movements. And so my poor grandmother, trying to raise 4 teenage daughters there in New York City area, was just not sure how to keep her daughter safe. So when 2 young, LDS clean-cut missionaries show up, and, and they have all their standards, and she never really believed the story of Joseph Smith, but she thought this is a safe place. And that's how they became Mormons. So my mom later married a missionary, and so I can't say growing up that we were super active, but by the time I was 12 years old, and my parents had gone through a divorce, I lived in Gilbert Mesa, Arizona area, and it's largely Mormons. That's all I knew. I only knew LDS people, and so I needed God, my mom was going through this divorce, and I gravitated towards just what I knew of God.
Yeah.
And so I would say I was kind of the instigator that got my family active again, because I was the oldest, and I would just drag everybody to church on Sunday. And so I loved the LDS Church. I really did, up until I think I was about 42 years old when my husband and I started to, have some questions and some doubts.
So you married an LDS man yourself?
Yes, he's generational LDS, back to the pioneer days of Mormonism. So very strong family. There's 10 kids in their family, and all but one, other than us, a very strong LDS family.
They're still strong
very
LDS
strong
family.
LDS family. Yep.
So you were LDS up until how old?
Till I was about 42 years old, and that's when and now let's see, that's been about 7 years. I'm 49 now. So at that time, my husband, who's an attorney, the very logical mind started to voice just some inconsistencies that he saw, some questions he had, and my sister, who's a doctor, she was teaching a gospel doctrine class and started to become aware of more things that she had never heard of. And so she left the church and became agnostic, and my brother left after her. And at that point, I was just, because the Mormon church kind of gives you this impression that if you leave, you're going to lose your salvation.
Doomed.
Yeah, your family's going to fall apart. And so I was just crying to my husband, their lives are going to fall apart. I was so worried. And my husband said, don't be so hard on them. He's like, I've got some questions too. And that was the first time.
That's first you knew?
First I knew of some of these questions he was wrestling with. And now looking back, I can see, because there was some sadness I could see in him, and some passivity that had come into our marriage, into his walk with God, and I couldn't understand it until he started to share. I have some questions, and as we had those questions together, I started to search within the church, the LDS Church. I didn't dare look at anti-Mormon literature, right? Yeah. So I started to search for answers to these questions that he was voicing, and for a while I pacified myself with these, apologetics coming out of Mormonism, but then after a while, those questions could not be answered anymore, and so at that time, is when I became aware of Denver Snuffer through a good friend of mine.
So you were still part of the LDS church
Yeah.
when you became aware of him. Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
and so a good friend of ours turned me on to him and gave me the book. I think it's his first one. It's the Second Comforter. And for those that might not know, the Second Comforter is the appearance of Jesus Smith to you in the flesh, or this is what Joseph Smith coined. The Second Comforter is receiving that. I guess it was like your sealing and anointing made sure. It was that appearance.
The second. Okay.
That witness of
the second anointing.
Yeah, it's that Jesus has appeared to you in the flesh. So Denver Snuffer was claiming that this had happened to him. And I think the draw for me and for many others to this movement was a teaching of coming closer to Jesus, spending time with him, which I had never really been taught through, in the LDS.
In the LDS church.
Yeah, and through Christianity, we teach that a lot, spending that time in that secret place and that time alone with God, how important that is to draw, that relationship and to build that relationship with God in the Word and in talking to him. But this is the first time I had heard it coming out of Mormonism. Denver Snuffer just really promoting spending that time and building that relationship.
So interjecting a question right here.
Yeah.
Where was your husband during this time that you're finding Denver Snuffer? Had he left the LDS faith?
So that's a great question, because at that point, before I started to head this way, he had said, well, we don't know of a better option. And honestly, like all our years growing up in Mesa and Gilbert, Arizona, we had never met a Christian in our lives.
Really?
Yeah, at least not one that was alive in Christianity enough for us to see that there was a difference about him and that they would even speak about it. And so he said, this is the best we know of how to raise a family. So at that point we knew there was issues, but he wanted to just remain status quo, not rock the boat. So he was at that place. So when I started to head this way and because I was spending more time with God, just trying to pray, even though now I know it wasn't really the same God.
It was your journey, though.
God was still meeting me there. I think maybe honoring my desire to know him. Now I see there was deception in those moments, but there were moments that I know it was God that was still there with me. So in that time, my husband just thought, as he started to read, because I got so excited about Denver Snuffer after reading The Second Comforter, I bought every book that he had written. And as of now, he's written about 16. I had quite a collection. So he picked up the one that got Denver Snuffer excommunicated, which is Passing the Heavenly Gift. He picked up that one and he just got a pit in his stomach, and he's like, this is worse than Mormonism.
Whoa.
And so, it's at the time I was really thinking he was going to come alongside me in this movement, and but he's like, I just can't go there, Jolene. And so he actually clung tighter to Mormonism for a short time. Then the story continues as it goes by. But yeah, so he clung tighter, and at that point, our marriage was really like on the rocks. We were already struggling a little bit before. He was a busy attorney, would get home at 8 o'clock every night. And so then at this point, when our marriage was really suffering, I was on this path, just feeling more alive than ever in this Denver Snuffer movement. And he's just clinging to the Mormon church because he doesn't know of anything different. Yeah. And we went on a hike, just with some friends, just about 45 minutes from our house. And it was there on that hike, at a little park, out just right near the hike, that we met this couple. And the gentleman is a man from Nepal. He used to be Hindu, and then his wife, they've become our dear friends. And she is just an amazing evangelist. She speaks and walks Jesus wherever she goes. The first Christian I really knew ever. So right there, first time we met them, they're with their 4 little girls, they start to share their story. And she shares that she grew up a missionary child in Austria. Her family, her parents were American, but they have felt to go on a mission to Europe, to Austria. And they lived there 30 years. They would drive a little T-bus, and they would drive to the Holy Spirit Spirit kind of showed them where to stop, and they'd serve coffee and tea and preach the gospel.
Wow.
So she shares that in this first meeting. I know. And I was like, oh my gosh, I need to know more. And so she had to change her baby's diaper, and our older daughter, who was at the time about 16 years old, her and I follow her to the car. She probably thought we were kind of crazy. So without James hearing, my husband, I just kind of whispered to her, I'm like, so we're really on this journey to try and find like truth, and we're Mormon, but we want to know truth, and how can we know more? And turns out she lived just like around the corner from me.
Oh.
So God was amazing to put this little family.
But is this before you joined the Snuffers?
I was in it. I was still
You were in it
mm-hmm.
at the time that you met
Yeah,
them.
and I still believed that this Denver Snuffer movement was the right movement.
Yeah.
But something about Amy and the way that she was sharing the gospel and Jesus drew me, and I was like, it started to open my eyes. I'm like, I want to know more about what she's saying. But I still very much was believing in
the Snuffer.
in Snuffer. It's in the Snuffers, like you mentioned. They believe in Joseph Smith very much, that he's a true prophet, and they still believe in the Book of Mormon. But that the church has veered off ever since Joseph Smith was martyred. So I was still believing that.
So what does Denver Snuffer have a name for his? Is he a group? Is he an organization?
Yeah.
Does he have a name for it?
Yeah, they don't really have an organization that I know of now. Now, it's been 5 years since I left the Denver Snuffer movement, but what they do call themselves now is the Remnant Movement.
The Remnant Movement, okay.
So I don't believe they're a 501c3 or anything like that yet.
So it's not a group like a polygamy group organization is?
No. Yeah, it's just a group of believers, and at the time that I was with them, and this was 5 years ago, they were about 2,000 members. I haven't been able to find something because I wanted to know and ask.
I've been looking into this before our interview. I found an article in 2017. They estimated there was somewhere between 5,000 and 10,000 followers in 49 of our states, plus other countries.
Oh, wow.
But it said that most of the followers are ex-Mormons or current Mormons.
Okay, that would make sense. Yeah. But wow, because I read something that said thousands, but it didn't give me a number, so that's so interesting to know that.
Yeah, that's still quite a wide, 5,000 to 10,000.
That's a big.
They always draw people. Does he encourage people to follow him as a prophet, like Joseph Smith did?
At first, he was very careful not to call himself a prophet, and he didn't want anybody to call him a prophet. But now I think, even though he may not promote himself and use the word prophet, he does include himself as a prophet. In fact, they've got a new canonized scriptures that they have, said this is their canon. And the last volume, the third volume, is a teachings and commandment volume, and it includes Joseph Smith, and which Denver Snuffer said that I believe I remember this, right? That if Hiram Smith had not died with Joseph Smith, that he would have been the successor prophet. And then he includes himself. So that right there kind of tells you he believes that was the progression of
that he is a prophet at that point then. Well, if he has visions and writes all these volumes, he's got to consider himself some value in that area.
Yes.
Now, you mentioned in our conversation that he had initially thought that he had to recover some lost information, lost papers or documents or teachings or whatever. What's the full story on that as far as Denver Snuffer claims?
So he is quite the historian, and I think and he's always been very interested in just the very old books, and go to all the old bookstores and estate sales and acquire anything he could get that Joseph Smith wrote, and just different articles. And so he's pieced together some of these things that he's found written by Joseph Smith and maybe Hiram Smith, and that's part of that third volume.
That's part of it.
But he also claims, that he has had multiple visions and appearances, like actual appearances from Jesus himself and Joseph Smith, that Joseph Smith has appeared to him as well, revealing all these new things that Joseph Smith didn't have time because he was martyred to truly reveal. And also he says that it was the people at the time, the LDS community at the time, or the Mormon community at the time of Joseph Smith, that were not following God properly, and so God withheld.
Okay.
So now he's revealing new.
You know, every breakaway sect of Mormonism, they have to recover something that they claim was lost by other prophets or teachings or lost pages or lost gospel or lost priesthood. Their opinion of God must be pretty low, that they don't think he can hang on to these things.
You're so right.
And that they're so lost. And they've all got to do that, though. I guess that's where they get their authority, is to recover something lost. So did he ever remark or teach that the Bible has the information? Now you say that he wanted you to grow closer to, he was teaching how you to grow closer to Christ. Did he ever bring the Bible into teaching how you could get closer to Christ?
Not too much. Most of the time it was more about your personal revelation and his revelation. But it's interesting, and part of our journey, it was a huge part of our journey, was that when my husband saw that here I am veering off from traditional Mormonism into this, group, that after meeting our new friends, our new Christian friends, and we got closer to them, she recommended that we go to marriage counseling with her pastor, and so of course when we went into the office, we met him at his house and just found him to be so delightful. My husband actually didn't realize he was a pastor, so it's kind of an interesting story how that happened. But in that process, it was really amazing, and my husband always says it was just such a turning point, was when the pastor looked at him and he said, "Do you believe in absolute truth?" And James said at the time, he had his New Age buddy, he had his family so strong in the Mormon church, me on this path, and he's like, he wanted to say, well, maybe everybody has their own truth, but he said he couldn't bring himself to say that, especially with the logical mind of an attorney. He's like, no, I believe there's got to be absolute truth. So the pastor looked at him and said, well, then you have the responsibility to find it. And so then he went on a journey, and he felt like God said, read my words, read the words of Jesus. So he snuck into a little Christian bookstore and bought his first red letter Bible.
Awesome.
And started to read with new eyes the words of Jesus. And so, he's so
and God
grateful.
promises, if you truly seek him with all your heart, you will find him. There's just no way that cannot happen.
So he found him, and so after a few months of just really, devouring the Word and just studying it with new eyes, I saw a changed man. Even though I was really upset he wasn't with me on my path.
Right.
But I started to see a man that instead of coming home tired and watching TV, he was devouring the Bible. He was in the Bible.
So nice.
He was reading 5 other Christian books at the same time. He just couldn't get enough. And so it's just amazing how God...
Now, in most of these Mormon break-off sects, like Deborah Snuffer is, they do not hold the Bible as any authority, or just maybe a minor authority in some issues. Exactly. What does Snuffer do with that?
Yeah, so with Snuffer, he says that no, like what Joseph Smith said, one of the articles of faith we know says we believe in the Bible as far as it's translated correctly, right?
So he holds on to that.
Yeah, so he holds on to that, and that's what's very interesting. So he, you don't really find it there. In fact, I think it's worse than in the traditional LDS church.
Really?
So it's interesting with the Bible. Just I think this is important to know. Joseph Smith did his own translation of the Bible. They say he wasn't able to finish it because he was martyred, but their new canon, this Dunmer-Snuffer movement, the Remnant movement, they have a new canon of scriptures, which includes the Joseph Smith inspired version of the Old Testament and New Testament. And so, there's some real dangerous things in there. I'll tell you, Ezekiel 14, where it talks about like if you look to a prophet and not to God for answers, and then it goes on to say that the punishment of that prophet will be the same. Your punishment will be the same as the prophets. I don't know if you recall that part in Ezekiel 14. It says that Joseph Smith changed it. I remember this really spoke to me in that journey of trying to figure out truth, where Joseph Smith changed it to say that your punishment will be not the same as the prophet, and so that you won't have the same condemnation and punishment if the prophet's off. So basically saying, follow the prophet. God won't condemn you. You need to follow the prophet.
And that's what all the polygamy groups teach it. Pardon me, and the Mormon Church teaches that. If they teach you to do something wrong, do it anyway. You'll be blessed, and he'll be the one that has to suffer.
And that the prophet will die. Well, Joseph Smith did die. But exactly.
Word.
But you were talking about the canon. That was such an important part of the journey when my husband, or not the canon, I'm sorry, about the Bible. That was an important part of the journey. So as my husband started to devour the Bible and really understand it, he found it so important to figure out, can I trust this Bible?
Yeah, that was one of my first things.
I bet
too.
he went through. He did so much research, so much that now he is leaving the law profession, and well, he's still in it actually, but he's slowly leaving it because he feels called to go to seminary and study the Bible more. But the Bible, like, he saw that there's so much evidence for it, and there's none for the Book of Mormon.
Exactly.
So yeah.
Now, you talked about some of the teachings, and let's go into some of his odd teachings.
Oh, yes.
That he, and we've got just a couple of minutes now, but then we've got another show we're going to do too. But he said that you could get closer and more perfect by being baptized in living water over and over again.
Oh, yes.
Let's talk about that.
Yeah,
What is this? First of all, what's living waters? How do you get it? Where do you find it?
Yeah.
And how many times is this over and over again included?
Yeah. It's a lot. I can't even remember how many times at the time. I was just thinking, because, you were talking about biblical grace. And so that kind of leads into this conversation of being baptized so many times.
Yeah.
It's that whole carrot on the stick. In 2 Nephi, it says you are saved by grace only after all you can do. So he lives on that after all you can do. That's Denver Snuffer. So he actually says that you cannot be saved unless you become what Joseph Smith said Jesus was, the prototype of the saved man. Joseph Smith said that. So he says, until we become like Jesus, we cannot be saved. And so this baptism process is like, they believed every time you were baptized, you were getting closer to being like Jesus. It's very condemning, because of course we know
so how often do you be baptized?
There were people getting baptized every weekend. I would say probably, for the 2 years I was in it, maybe once a month. I mean, it was...
You'd get rebaptized.
Yeah, and living water is like any natural body of water, like a lake or a river or an ocean.
Not standing water.
No standing water, And
not
so there, I knew of
that.
people that they would break the ice. I mean, I have to say, the people that are in this movement, they want God. So I don't want anybody to think that I'm speaking bad of them. I want Christians out there to become friends with them, just like people did for us, because they are hungry for truth. They're hungry for God so much that they are willing to go through so much to follow this guy, because they don't know any better. They haven't read the Word.
And that's why we're doing this, so that people, who are searching for God will take the opportunity to hear what you have to say and do their own search, do their own research, not listen to a man. We're out of time for this time. However, we are going to do part 2 of Jolene's story, because there's certainly a lot more to tell. We want to thank her for coming and sharing the information that she's learned from her experiences of being part of the LDS Church and of the Denver Snuffer movement. And so the next time will be the final show in this series of why should people follow a man and what they say Jesus wants, when they can just follow Jesus and know firsthand a personal relationship with him, what he wants, without a mediator between him and Jesus, or she and Jesus. So thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time with part 2 of Jolene Phelps' testimony. Thank you.